know, you get to see the power of the media in changing events firsthand, particularly on Wednesday night when many of us were getting texts and messages that an aircraft had crashed on the Potomac near Washington National Airport in D.C. I certainly received it from so many people, and as someone who owns print media, the Baltimore Sun, just how our reporters were just rushed to work to get the story right as the details began to unfold. And all before, it was all about Robert Kennedy Jr.'s hearings, Cash Patel, Tulsa Gabbard's hearing coming up, and all of a sudden, America had a priority. You had a 64-passenger aircraft that was hit by a Black Hawk helicopter, and I think what people forget sometimes when this happens, sometimes it takes rescue workers to get to the scene, maybe an hour. And when you're dealing with frigid temperature and weather like it was on this past Wednesday night, the possibilities of survivors are just absolutely zilch. It's just a tragedy, especially for many of the people on the panel today who travel. And like me, when I decide to fly commercial, I refuse to fly anything unless it's a direct flight. And all of us have flown on these small aircrafts into Charlotte, North Carolina, or Myrtle Beach, or Charleston, South Carolina, Kansas. These aircrafts that are in partnership with American Airlines or maybe Delta. You know, when we get on there, we're boarding and we see the airline stewardess and the pilots in the cockpit, and we're taking our seats and we look at people in the face. Sometimes I think to myself privately, boy, I just hope this is not it. We all have, no matter how strong our faith is, we all have this in the back of our minds that this could be it, because you can fly a million times and you have a tragedy like we had this past week and your life can just go up in flames, because the Bible tells us death comes like a thief in the night. We don't know the minute nor the hour, but be ye also ready. But are we ever ready for such an explosion in midair if that happens to us? So, you know, our hearts really goes out to those families, the kids who were involved in figure skating, the mothers, the coaches that were on that aircraft. And we all know the feeling of when our mothers and our loved ones and our friends are coming to visit us or returning from a trip and we're down by baggage claim, or we're waiting at the gate, especially as children, because we're the only ones that can take them off that airplane. And you get this sunken feeling when you start hearing all these rumors and all these texts that an aircraft crashed, and all of a sudden you realize it was a flight from Kansas, and you know, oh my God, it's my loved one, and you get that sunken feeling, oh my God, it's just the worst case scenario. And then it's all confirmed. We all can relate to it, and so I just cannot emphasize enough the devastation that those family members are feeling and that they will never, ever, ever heal from. So our thoughts and our prayers really goes out to them, and I hope it doesn't give those that fly a reason to pause, because still, air safety is the safest of them all. With vehicles, train is still the best, but there comes a time when these things happen, and instead of us wondering why, we just have to keep in mind, just by the grace of God goes all of us. And it reminds us what's important in life. Instead of us talking about Trump and his policies and an agenda and confirmation, we realize just how fragile life is, and it's a reminder for us to keep everything in perspective. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. C.J. Jordan is joining us today. Bruce Fine is in studio, and Patrice Onwuka is also joining us. Patrice is certainly one of my favorite guests. She has such an intellect and such an understanding to these discussions. I always welcome her on the broadcast. So let me just start here. You know, CJ called me this week, and she was in a panic, and she said, people don't really understand what Donald Trump is doing with the EEOC, the DEI, and cutting these programs. And I think people really need to understand what's actually going on here. And she said, can I come on and talk about it? So you know what I'm going to do? I want to start with you, CJ, to talk about exactly fact versus fiction in terms of what the president is doing with these programs.
Well, first, Armstrong, thank you for having me on your show. And I offer my prayers to a grateful nation, but also for all the families that have been involved. You know, we are grieving as a nation for those souls that were lost last night. One of the things that I really wanted to do is, as we know, the president throughout the campaign talked about DE&I. And I think a lot of people really don't understand. First of all, the president, there was so many misinformation going around. The president did not get rid of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He did not get rid of EEO. The only part, and there were two parts of affirmative action. There was the affirmative action that Nixon put in place. My advisor, a good friend of yours, Bob Brown, it dealt with the affirmative, that if one decided to sue based on discrimination, then you could be awarded on the affirmative if the courts found. The executive order that was dealt with, which was for Johnson, put into place, which says, hey, you must do government contracting using quotas. Now, if we remember during the first Trump administration, when he did permanent funding for our historical Black colleges and universities, the first thing he said, look, I don't believe in quotas, but I do believe in aspirational goals. And he instructed the federal government to increase contracting opportunities for HBCUs to 5%. Now, does that sound like somebody who's racist, who's in a business community that understands goals and objectives? Because I'm sure you, Armstrong, as a CEO of a multimedia conglomerate, you go to your sales force and you say, hey, we have a goal of 27% increase in advertising. You don't go in there and say, hey, I need you to do this, 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 and this with not an aspirational goal. You don't go in and say, hey, I need 10 Black, companies to, do advertising from my firm. You just say to your sales team, hey, this month we're down 10% and we have an aspirational goal to close out the month at 27% on advertising spend. You don't care where it comes from. That's what Donald Trump is saying. Look, DEI was the above what talks about civil rights and the laws that are on the book. And that came up in SBA's congressional hearing when it talked about, and Senator Jonah Ernest was spot on. Senator Kelly Loeffler, who is going to be our next SBA administrator, talked about, I will uphold the statutory laws that are on the books. DEI was brought on not as law, it was conceived ideas to enhance, but they were not laws. And that's what the president is talking about. We want to follow the law that's on the book, the statutory law.
Here's what I find fascinating, Bruce Fine. When Biden and Harris, when they were in the White House, even when you had an illegal migrant or whomever committed a heinous crime, there was a legal process, there was due process. We had to go through the court. It seems as though now no one is talking about due process. They're not talking about going to the courts. They're rounding them up, putting them on cargo planes, just dropping them off. Trump is talking about Guantanamo Bay, where you have 30,000 beds, about pushing some there if they run out of space. It just seems as though the rule of law, and even when you ask the mayors and those that govern these cities that had pushed back against Trump in the beginning, it seemed to be on board now, because I think what is going on here is that much of their constituency is on board, that this has gone too far. I no longer have the compassion that I once had. We need to take care of Americans first, and whatever it takes, just get them out of here. Is that where we are?
I think that's substantially accurate, and I think a bill that was signed by the president, I believe yesterday, says that if an alien is arrested for a series of crimes, not proved guilty, just an arrest. And listen, I've been in law enforcement. It doesn't take very much to get an arrest. Boom, you're gone. They don't wait to see whether you're actually guilty. You're talking about due process. There isn't any due process there. I mean, it's like, could you imagine if we had the system in the United States, anybody arrested is automatically assumed guilty, you don't have a trial, and you go to prison?
That's what's happening now.
Yeah,
They all assume guilty.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the fact is that the antagonism is so great that we're losing sight of the fact that you have to differentiate. And I think that underscores the United States' commitment to treating people as individuals. They're not all the same. That's why you have hearings, because maybe some of them are guilty and some of them are not. But we have a stampede-like attitude, and I mean, even in these immigration raids, I think they have more journalists and TV men and cameramen than the so-called aliens that they're going to be deported, because it's all, you know, TV. It's an extravaganza rather than
a drama. It's a drama series.
Yeah, yeah.
And Patrice, I've got something else to talk to you about, but I'm going to get you in on this with the minute we have left. I mean, American people don't care. They don't care.
Well, let's look at the polling where Americans have shifted. In 2016, 36% of Americans supported mass deportations. As of last week, it's up to 56%. So over half of Americans today are supportive of mass deportations, particularly of those who are violent criminals who have committed rape, incest, murder, or have been involved in the drug trade, or are kingpins. And so I think, especially after the past 4 years where we've seen such a relaxed and frankly just a nonchalant view of immigration in our border, and Americans have felt, not just seen, but felt the impact of immigration, illegal immigration, not legal, but illegal immigration in their cities, in their towns, that whether you're talking about from a public safety standpoint or a public resource standpoint, they're more than willing to see violent, criminal, illegal aliens removed from this country. And that's why President Trump was given that mandate when he was elected.
And boy, but I would say this, I don't know any other president, Democrat or Republican, that would have the backbone to do it and do it in such a demonstrably way, saying just get them out. They just got to go, because they're normally political. They care about the optics of it. But Donald Trump just does not care, and everybody falls in line.
Well, but that goes, Armstrong, to your point about process. You can say you want to deport all the criminals, and I would agree. But you have to have a trial before you know they're a criminal.
There's your Bruce Smith. Forget about this trial. The trial, they have become the judge, the jury, and the verdict. They are being deported in cargo planes. And I don't make fun of it. It's just fascinating to watch how, given the new leader in charge, how everything changes and everybody falls in line. We'll be back. It's really something to watch. Patrice, this is what I have for you. The President of the United States is ending our relationship with the World Health Organization, WHO, because they've been in bed with China. They've not always had our best interests. We pay them money, but this is unprecedented. What are the ramifications for this?
Well, the WHO has certainly been a leader in delivering vaccines to many poor and developing countries. So they're going to lose a significant amount of revenue. I believe somewhere around 40% of their revenue will come from the United States. I could be corrected. So they're going to take a hit. But that also means that you're removing funding for a lot of the programs and agendas that the World Health Organization were committing around the world that have been destructive, whether it's cultural issues or areas where they're engaging in ways that I think American values would not support that. The World Health Organization needs to figure out what its mission is and be very mission critical and demonstrate that they are going to use their funds in a way that is to support real health and not become, honestly, just a cover for a lot of other countries like China. And I think it just gets back to the pandemic and how the World Health Organization treated the COVID pandemic and the origins of the COVID pandemic, and seem to have been providing coverage to China when it comes to how the pandemic started and how it was spread. So if they want to set themselves up and regain the United States' trust, they have a lot of cleaning of house to do.
You know, CJ, the president also signed an executive order to end all funding to hospitals, schools, medical research, and these institutions that provide changes for surgeries for minors in terms of this agenda that has been going on. He signed that executive order. What is that impact?
Well, basically what is stated is clear and simple. The American people felt that, one, there are no standards when we talk about changing the sex of a child. Even Caitlin Gentler talked about there are no medical standards even for adults. So why are we using children as guinea pigs? I mean, we're giving children hormone treatment that most women don't get when they have hysterectomies. We're giving minors testosterone level that are used for those who are that are being castrated for predatory offenses. This is not the type of medicine for a young child. And President Trump is absolutely right to stand up and to guard those who are defenseless, who can't speak for themselves. And so it is saying, because again, hospitals make money off of surgeries. They're not making money off of just you coming in and doing an overnight stay because you don't feel well. Surgery is how they make the bulk of their money. And so a lot of hospitals were making a lot of money off of sex changes off of minors separate of adults.
With no concern about the consequences for these kids. It's all about the money. You know, I do want to mention this, and I'm going to get everybody's input on this, because this is somewhat a topic that I've contemplated for some time. You know, I have family members that own businesses, and also friends, of course, and they will tell you that people working remote is more than just about going back to work. The government has gotten itself into this game where people make more money and more benefits by staying at home instead of going back to work, because those benefits provide more for them in their life still, more money than most middle-class workers. And so the government has created a system to encourage people not to go back to work. And yet, you have Mr. Trump offering 2.5 million Americans incentives not to return to work. Now, let me caution you, if you're one of those 2.5 million, I'll be very careful of that Trojan horse, okay? You can read between the lines. Be very careful if you take that Trojan horse. Because listen, you got to read the language. They're going to do it anyhow because you really don't have the protections that you once had. But if you're going to lay off, if you're going to get 2.5 million people out of the government to step away, don't you think that's going to lead, you're going to lead a void in government? Are there certain things in these agencies that are absolutely almost irreplaceable that you need to have in place? I don't believe that all these workers are inefficient. I think some of these workers are very vital. But Bruce, how do you balance those two? The federal workers, and yes, there are a lot of Americans that the government literally crippled to not go back to work.
Well, you have to have a case-by-case basis. I was in a transition from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan. A similar kind of issue, because most of these civil servants then were, even policymakers, had been appointed during the Carter administration. But you can't have a blunderbuss approach. You have to evaluate, is this person competent? Are they doing the job? Are they going to be loyal to the policy issues that are being promoted here? Now, one of the jeopardies with regard to taking the layout is there's something called the Anti-Deficiency Act. Congress hasn't appropriated a penny for any of these buyouts. the president cannot pay them money, unless Congress appropriates it, and we know we're coming into
That's
a budget
why I
crunch
say the Trojan horse. That's exactly right.
So, and
that's true.
The other thing that's perverse here is that you can imagine that the ones who are most likely to take the payout, if it comes, are the ones who have an option in the private sector that looks very attractive.
Or in other words, they have another job at home. They have 2 jobs.
But they don't need the government work. The worst ones will be the ones who will stay because they don't have any options. So you end up getting the lowest common denominator when you're trying to have a merit-based system in your workforce. That's kind of a perverse result.
Patrice, sure.
Yeah, listen, I actually belong to a family where we have a federal worker, and we absolutely are figuring out what this means. I think that it's important to balance flexibility with ensuring that your federal workforce is actually working. I'm sure all of us have been in conversations with friends who said, yeah, I work for the government and I finish my job by 11 a.m., but they're being paid for longer than that. Or they've heard of stories of federal workers who have used the privileges they have of working from home, working remotely, or just not getting a lot of work done and moonlighting during their 9 to 5 job. So I think that's what's really going on here. Elon Musk, if you look at his history, he came into Twitter at the time and really took a hatchet to its workforce and really demanded more of the employees that decided to stay. And so I think we're seeing this kind of private sector approach. And by the way, a lot of companies, particularly in the tech sector, are bringing back their workers into the office full time. So this is just a natural follow along where we're seeing the public sector follow where the private sector has already been. Will there be constitutional issues or legal issues? I'm sure there are. You all are certainly raising a few of them there. But that does mean that there are a number of workers who are thinking, okay, what do I do from a child care standpoint? Or how does my family adjust to this new reality?
I know we've all have followed Israel and Hamas finally reaching an agreement. But I must tell you, on Thursday, watching 110 terrorists, and what was fascinating, a lot of them were kids that were being held, that were in Israeli prisons. I was really, really real kids, but to watch that emotional scene after all the chaos to finally get to the point where they're swapping terrorists for hostages and the conditions that these hostages are in, is just really, it was a roller coaster. CJ, will the peace last? Was this something that Netanyahu really wanted to do? But definitely Trump threatened them that he wanted this agreement in place before he was sworn in, and it certainly did happen. Just how fragile is this? And to those that are being released, let me tell you, it's like a day of making a walk towards heaven.
Well, I think here are 2 things that's going to happen. I think we're all going to monitor to see if Hamas keeps its word. The second thing that we're going to be looking at is the one thing that we all saw is, with some complicity with the Palestinian Authority, that we know folks lied to the American people and to the world when they said they had no idea that tunnels were up under hospitals, that were giving weapons to children, indoctrination using the money that we were sending there for books to indoctrinate kids. So it's no surprise that you're seeing young children that were probably arrested, years ago, and most frequently being terrorists because they were indoctrinated and using United States money that was being sent there for humanitarian relief. So I am hoping that the different leaders in the Middle East will be able to come together and kind of figure out, what are we going to do with the Palestinian Authority? How are we going to address the Hamas individuals? Because again, a lot of the refugees saying that, look, they want Hamas to go and they want to be able to not live in poverty. So how can you tell us that you have, the president saying Jordan, the vast majority of your population is Palestinian, Egypt, you need to take some, and let's just completely tear it down and rebuild and give the Palestinian Authority some structure. Because the American people are no longer going to continue to throw their taxpayer money for people to be educated and indoctrinated to hate the United States, to hate Israel, because we keep forgetting that Israel has a right to exist and to defend its borders.
You know, Patrice, there's a new risk for employers in America, and that is losing millions of migrant workers who have temporary work permits. That's huge.
It's huge. I think we have to first off recognize there are different visa programs. Some that work can work better. And I hope that the Trump administration will look into making sure that our visa process, work visa process, is flexible enough to meet the demands and needs of any regional and industry-wide area. That said, I've heard a lot of hyperbole, a lot of people, particularly on the left, saying, well, who's going to pick blueberries for the yoga mom's yoga after spin class or yoga class? Who's going to, these farm workers are all illegal immigrants. The question is, well, why is it that we have industries that are hiring illegal immigrants in this country and putting them to work?
Because they're cheap. You know why they hire them, and they don't have to pay the benefits, and they're not going to make any beef in the workplace because they know their situation is very tenuous. You know why?
So that opens the door to the conversation about either we're paying American workers more, and that means higher prices that Americans have to pay, or we start to invest in innovation and automation of some processes. But I don't believe that we should just accept, well, we have a lot of illegal immigrants working in jobs that Americans don't want. You have to ask why, and you have to ask, is that sustainable in the long run? That's not a good answer.
I got to tell you this, as we go out the break. 100% of the time, when I speak to employers, they love the work ethic of these migrants. They work not until the job is done. They start another job when the job is done. They just have the work ethic. They don't get a lot of pushback. They're very respectful, and they're not lazy. I'm not saying Americans are lazy. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm telling you what they're conveying. Much more on this edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show when we return on this first day of February 2025. That's right, the truth.
Of course. I know. The biggest champion of the migrants are
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Let me welcome Tyler back from the Daily Signal. You know, the White House rescinded its memo on the federal freeze, Tyler, after it caused widespread mass confusion. What does this all mean, and why did they rescind it? And what is the new understanding?
Yeah, so I think this freeze is being misrepresented. It is a positive move to try to defund many of the unjust funding that the federal government had been giving to these activist groups. that were pushing ideologies that are negative to the American people and that were actually trying to influence federal policy. And it's interesting, as soon as this freeze was announced, a whole bunch of groups filed a lawsuit against the federal government to try to block it. I took a look at these organizations, and one of them is just this broad umbrella group called the National Council of Nonprofits. And they found a very left-leaning law firm to represent them. And one of the groups is an organization, an LGBTQ group called SAGE. And they receive federal funding for initiatives to help the mental health of LGBTQ elderly people. So I'm like, all right, if these are noble goals, like maybe helping LGBTQ elderly people's mental health, that could be a noble goal. But I don't necessarily see a compelling reason why the federal government should be the place to pay for it. Why do taxpayers have to foot the bill for these things? And these activist groups are essentially the reason why Trump wanted to freeze this funding in the first place. It's because we saw under the past administration huge amounts of money going to activists who were pushing, for instance, to send illegal aliens across the country that were abetting the border crisis. And it's high time for the federal government to reconsider these grants. Now, maybe a freeze isn't the right way to do it. I think that's the main reason, besides the lawsuit, that the White House rethought it. But as the White House has been saying, this is part of their policy going forward. They're going to look at federal grants and try to cut waste and abuse.
What's fascinating, Tyler's answers fascinates me. I'm coming to you because I know you're going to challenge it. Of course you are. And I want you to, by the way. What's interesting is that many of the people inside Trump's orbit had no idea that this was happening in the first place. So talk about...
that means you need to have quality control and at least some vetting. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with the overall sentiments voiced by Tyler, but we have a process. I was around when the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 was established. The Supreme Court had ruled when Congress appropriates the money, you can't refuse to spend it. And the Impoundment Control Act, which was signed under President Nixon, says that if the president believes that funds should not be expended, he explains in a message to Congress that he wants to rescind the spending. If Congress doesn't approve the rescission in 45 days, it goes forward. And then there's a companion deferral operation. But you got to stick with the process. Now, Mr. Trump is certainly entitled to seek a repeal of the Impoundment Control Act. He can't say, I don't like the law, and it goes away. That's not process, and I think that's why they lost the lawsuit. It's certainly worthy to re-examine many of the spendings, which I believe in a very large percentage of time shouldn't be there. But you have to do it in consultant with the Congress in accord with the Constitution, which wasn't done this time. Maybe they'll go back and rethink it the next time, but there are ways in which the president can rescind spending.
Process it. Patricia.
And Armstrong, can I interject one quick second?
Yes. Knock yourself out.
I served in the first Trump administration at the Department of Commerce. One of the things that we were charged for those of us who beached head in was for every one regulation, remove two so that we could deregulate and spur the economy. The next thing we did department by department, and he gave us 90 days, but we were able to deal with it in 2 weeks. We did a review of all grants, all loans in the Department of Commerce, and it was agency-wide, government-wide, to look for, what grants are out there, give the secretary or the senior advisor a report of what was on the books, and evaluate the worthiness of that grant. And I think that is where we're going to go since this lawsuit and the retraction of the EO.
Patricia, CJ just took me to another conversation that I wouldn't have had she not mentioned regulation. Regulation is what Vivek Ramaswamy was pitching more than a reduction and the federal workforce. He felt that's where the real issue is, the administrative state. Obviously, there's a rift between Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. I actually thought Elon Musk, over the last few days, even challenged the president. But he did. He did challenge the president. And you know what? The media didn't play it up. He really challenged the president. But it seems as though Elon is having his way. He has unprecedented power. I'm not saying one thing is wrong with it one way or the other, but Vivek is out. He's going to run for governor of Ohio in 2 years. He lost. What is Elon's agenda? How realistic is it? And who and what? How do we measure it going forward?
Well, I think.
No, not you, CJ, and
Okay,
Patricia.
sure.
Patricia. Oh no.
Well, I would just have listened to CJ. She's a wealth of information. From what we do know, the idea behind DOGE, or one of the aspirations, is to cut over $2 trillion from the federal budget. Vivek's focus on deregulation is also part of that, but not just saving, but also ensuring that the federal government doesn't continue to stifle small businesses, individuals with regulations that either are promoting a particular agenda or are just not helpful. Maybe they're arcane, maybe they're old. And from what I understand, the current administration, it wants to up the ante, so to speak. So instead of 2 regulations out for every new in, which was Trump 1.0, I think the president mentioned in a speech earlier this week, that he's going for 10 regulations out of every one. So there's going to be a deep cleaning of the federal register to look at what really is on the books that needs to go. And I think over the past 4 years, the administration has a lot to work with. When you consider the non-inflation reducing Inflation Reduction Act that really did nothing but ushered in a lot of climate change spending and regulations that can hamper the economy. So you're going to see that with the CHIPS Act. You're going to see just generally the Build Back Better, American Rescue Plan, all of the regulations that were imposed on small businesses, on individuals. I think a lot of us have heard of the Venmo tax, where if you send payments through Cash App of over $600 annually, you might have to report that, or if you receive that, you're reporting that as income suddenly. So there's a lot for DOGE to work with, and from a deregulatory standpoint.
Let me come back to you, CJ. CJ?
I'm here.
Did you want to add? Take away?
Well, so here's the excitement about this. In the first Trump administration, once those deregulations actions took place, you saw over 8,000 Black-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses that grew. And that's where President Trump is trying to take the federal government on this one. And he also said that, hey, we're going to have not a 2.0, but a 10.0 on opportunity investment zones. Because, again, during COVID, all of that kind of shrunk. Black-owned and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses shrunk. And so having that workforce come back into the office, because again, when I was there, telework, you could only do 2 days. And even in 2017, there were those staff who had senior authority, but they weren't SESs, were taking telework 3 days a week. And that was abuse in that component. So I think you're gonna see with deregulation, with DOGE, really saying, does this make sense? We saw the president do deregulation to spare things of COVID vaccines. Now, whether we agree or disagree on whether or not we should take it, that's a whole total different issue. So we're going to be looking at the permitting process. And that's what you saw the president talk about when he went not just to Helene, you saw him in California, you saw the VP in Damascus, Virginia. They all talked about the permitting process to rebuild America. And when we evaluate the CHIPS Act and others, they're going to be looking at, wait a minute, what unnecessary things did they add into these bills that are unrelated to the actual piece of legislation? Because we all know pork gets added to every bill.
You know, the State Department has literally reversed almost full throttle all foreign aid. It is just amazing to watch. There's a new sheriff in town. Tyler, you're shaking your head. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to break, and I'm gonna come back. And then there's this mass exodus from states where there are anti-abortion laws, and it's picking up steam. That and much more on this February 1st edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Yeah, they're just totally reversing foreign aid.
I know, but some of that.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, I'm going to make a prediction. It was interesting watching Trump help Jim Acosta, CNN move him to the graveyard shift, and Jim Acosta saying, I'm moving on. My prediction is that he will be picked up by MSNBC. That's just my prediction. Let's talk about this foreign aid, Tyler O'Neill. It's just totally been reversed, my man.
Yeah, I think it's a really great example of Rubio cleaning house, changing gears. You notice he has a lot of exemptions on this freeze on foreign aid. So like he is taking a specific approach. I think it's also important to note, I wrote a book last week called The Woktopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government. And when you talk about these changes in the Trump administration, these are undoing a lot of what the woke activist group were demanding in the Biden. And those woke activist groups are now trying to fight from outside the Trump administration to try to prevent him from fulfilling his agenda and his promise to the American people.
Is the massive public uprising against anti-abortion laws, Tyler, a sign of a deeper culture shift, or is it just another battle in Americans' ongoing ideological war?
I think it's just another battle. If you look at the amount of people who are leaving these laws that are, these states that are cracking down on abortion, I think it's still smaller than the amount of people who are leaving states like California and New York for freer places like Florida and Texas. The changes that we're seeing, America is being bifurcated along partisan lines, unfortunately. And I think that's just a natural result of the different worldviews that people are having in different places. So in a state like Florida and a state like Texas that are protecting unborn lives in the womb, there are a lot of people who don't like that and who want to move to pro-abortion state. But there are also people who want their businesses to work better and who want the peace of mind to know that if there's another pandemic like COVID happen, things are going to open a lot faster. That's one of the reasons why Florida is continually a very popular place to move, even though they have a strong abortion law.
Bruce Fine, you know, I insinuated that Elon Musk challenged the president. You know, liberals are just sniping wanting this honeymoon to end. They just don't think it can last. What are your thoughts about what developed this past week, and what did we learn from this relationship?
Well, I hope we learn that process counts. The president can do things. There are court opportunities to challenge it. Congress, unfortunately, is typically AWOL. They should be exercising oversight. They should be passing laws like they did during Roosevelt when he had the same kind of power, but he got it enshrined in legislation, so it didn't disappear when he lost the presidency. But I keep coming back. Our deliverance is being faithful to the process. We have laws, we have the Constitution, we have ways in which these are adjudicated. We can never forget that is the key to harmony and peace, and we agree with the result because the process is fair. And you can go back and try the process again. But that's what's critical. If we believe we got one-man show and it's Musk or it's Trump or anybody else, Biden, run the whole country, we are in deep trouble. We are not a monarchy.
Boy, I got to tell you, Patrice, they're really demonizing Joe Biden now. Let me tell you, everything that has happened, Patrice, they're blaming Joe Biden. I'm reading the editorials, the column. It's never been harsher on his legacy. But one thing they've not talked about enough this week, and we have to do it here as a matter of integrity. Bob Menendez is going to jail for 11 years. Now, in case for those that may forget, why is the former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a Democrat, going to jail? He was sentenced. The jury found him guilty 11 years. Patrice, take us back down corrupt lane.
Yeah, so, the common refrain, no one is above the law. Well, Bob Menendez has finally seen that the chickens are coming home to roost, and that phrase is true. It's been an embarrassment to see him serving in the Senate and at times surrounded by some of his Democratic colleagues who were trying to run cover for him when we've seen Republicans who've also faced bribery or corruption charges also come to light, and so much has been poured on their heads. So, President Biden's legacy, I think, is being dismantled now by his own party because they recognize that him not stepping out of the race sooner and then not then so many people in his inner circle and in the media covering for him had lost them the presidency and lost them the House and the Senate and many governorships across this and legislatures across this country. But, I think his biggest legacy, President Biden's legacy, is the fact that, inflation is up over 20% since when he left office, and that prices have not come down, even if the inflation rate is not as high as it was in 2022. That's really what's going to mark his presidency, in addition to the cover-up over his mental decline since probably the day he took office.
Bruce, let's be candid here. The Democrats need a scalp. Head self, it didn't work. I find it fascinating when they refer to him as the Secretary of Defense. Head self. I'm sure it just drives them crazy. Kash Patel is going to be confirmed. Robert F. Kennedy is going to be confirmed. Tulsi Gabbard, but listen, I'm getting to what happened this past week and the confirmation hearings and how much of it was smooth sailing. Why? Because, may I remind you again, the Republicans have a trifecta. It doesn't matter the theater in the Senate Finance and Education Committee hearing rooms. In the Senate, it's 53-47. In case you don't understand what it means, if every Democrat on the committee vote against the nominee, if every Democrat vote against them on the House of the floor, they still will be confirmed. Bruce Fein.
Well, Hegseth lost 3 Republican votes, and one of them was Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. So it isn't as strictly party line.
But he was confirmed.
But it was.
That's
but
the bottom line.
But
no
the
matter
next
how
time,
you
if there's
catch
4,
it,
I know.
He was confirmed. That means Democrats voted for him.
That means Democrats did not vote for him at all.
That's exactly right.
But they got 3 Republicans. You need 1 more, and maybe there'll be a difference if it's not Secretary of Defense.
But Bruce, you and I both know that's a game. They allow them to cover themselves by not voting for them as long as they have the majority of votes that they need. Come on now, who do you think you're talking to?
No, I disagree on that score. When Mitch McConnell,
I'm not saying it was not a principal vote, but they knew they could lose Mitch McConnell because they had the votes they needed to confirm him for the president.
No,
That's
I understand there's a calculation.
Okay,
but I'm not saying that and they may well be that the others get confirmed.
But my question to you is, will they all be confirmed?
No, I don't believe all of them may be confirmed. I believe that Robert Kennedy, because of his crusty personality, and his sister writes and says he's a sexual predator. You should never touch this guy.
That's not his sister. It was his first cousin. Caroline is his first cousin.
Okay, apologize.
Okay,
apologize.
Okay.
But I think that.
And listen, there is nothing she said and referred to him as a sexual predator. There was absolutely no doubt that this, because she claims he's anti-vaccine and our little children died, and that makes him a predator. Come on.
No, I don't believe that's what it was about. But putting
it's just a headline. It was just a headline.
Putting that aside.
But you think they're going to get his scalp?
I think they would get his scalp. And remember John Tower, he was denied Secretary of Defense because he had a drinking problem. And I was around when John Tower was nominated. He had been in the Senate, very prominent head of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Sometimes there's surprises.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm just saying it's conceivable.
Let me do this before we get out of here. Let me do this with the panel. What scalp of all the president's nominees will the Democrats end up with? I'll start with you, Tyler O'Neill. I don't think any. I think they're all going to be confirmed. But you go ahead, Tyler.
Matt Gaetz.
Oh, please, Matt Gaetz. He didn't even
Besides
make.
that, goose egg.
So you don't think any? You think they're all going to be confirmed?
I think they're glide path.
CJ?
Zip, nada, none.
None.
They all gonna be confirmed.
Patricia?
100% all confirmed. And I think the fact that you had such a national emergency with this plane crash here in D.C. underscores why it's important to have the cabinet members in position, because you never know what can happen at any time. And I think that's going to cover over all of the qualms people have with the different nominees.
Listen, in the 2 minutes that we have left, I'm going to give President Trump some mad respect. Because I'm telling you, I have never seen a president and his team so organized, so focused on every aspect of government. They've got these Democrats in turmoil. And in fact, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, declared, you're doing too much. Well, the American people have said, you didn't do enough. Patrice, which way we're going to have it? Too much or not enough? What do the American people want?
They want too much as can undo what happened in the past 4 years.
Tyler?
They want too much, but I have to warn, the woke-topus is going to fight back.
Did you say the woke-topus? Is that a new term?
Yeah, that's my book.
Okay, CJ, I'll leave that alone, but go ahead.
I think the president is going to continue to roll, and it's going to be like a freight train coming, like Rufus Freight Train, Georgia. That's what you're going to have.
And I want to say this, as we started this show today, our hearts goes out to the family members that grieving the loss of their loved ones on that American Airlines flight this past Wednesday. Even though some of the panelists did not comment on it, I wanted to move away from it quickly. They care. We send our regrets, and just know, only by the grace of God that it's not us, because we all fly. So that's why the Bible say, pray ye for one another that ye may be healed, because we never know when that time and that moment comes, and we should always be ye also ready. But in the meantime, you got to keep living, because if you're not living, you're dying. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Good day, everyone.